Hello everyone, welcome to day 19 of our 30-day watercolor flower series. Today we are painting lilacs. Now lilacs are a really bushy plant that is made up of a bunch of tiny little flowers. So while we are going to be painting individual flowers, we're really going to be painting this grouping of flowers in kind of a bushy textured feel all together. So I'm going to show you how to paint them individually, but also get the look of them all grouped together at the same time. The individual lilac flowers are made up of 4 petals with a distinct yellow center. So we're definitely going to paint some of those. As you can see, I've sketched some very distinct flowers out, but then we're also going to have some that are half hidden, that are peeking out, so they look like they're all grouped in one whole bunch. Next to the lilacs are very large leaves. They have incredibly large leaves and they kind of fan out over the top of these lilac bunches. For the lilacs, we are going to mix a purpley pink color that has a fair bit of water so that it is a light color and not super pigmented yet at this point. Then we're going to use our brush to kind of make these longer curved shapes for the petals. We're going to do a few that are really distinct and very exact with their 4 petals. And then we're going to start making petals behind the main petals. So we want them to look bunched up and like they are just all over the place. We're going to leave some very distinct centers so that we can add some more color contrast and also the yellow centers at the very end. But we don't necessarily need a lot of flowers to be very distinct in being front and center or having the exact 4 petals. If you have a few of them that give the idea of the general shape of the lilac flowers, then all you need to do is create these other petals peeking out and reuse the petals to create the shape of the bunch. I'm picking up some bright cerulean blue to add to the bottoms of the petals right around the center. So we're kind of making a ring around that open center, leaving it still white for later. We're doing this while everything is still a little bit wet so that we get a nice bleed, but don't be afraid of the harsh lines here. We kind of like that severe contrast with these really simple flowers. So lilacs are kind of cone shaped, I would say. They have a thicker base, and as they go forward, they become thinner. So that's what we're trying to create with these flower petals as we are coming out farther and farther on the edges. We want the end to be thinner and more pointed like a cone, and then to have thickness towards the base where we're going to be putting the leaves. So I'm using those curved shapes we're making for the flower petals to create the texture and the fullness in different areas to create the entire look of the bunched cone that lilacs have. Also, try not to make this cone shape too uniform. You can have, one edge of your cone be a little bit more full, so it's not like a perfect cone. Not a whole lot of flowers will grow perfectly, especially in a cone shape. So we want some of our flowers sticking out in odd places, or a little lump here or there, or maybe the lilac kind of comes to more of a point on one side and curves a little bit. Anything you can do to make it look organic and natural and not super straight and uniform will really help the entire feeling of your bunched lilac. Now we're adding another bunch of lilacs over to the left and just under. This one's going to go a little bit lower, creating some layering and interest, a little bit more movement with the curvature. I have a little bit of white space between both of these bunches so that you can kind of tell the difference between them at this point, but we'll be able to define the difference between where one group starts and another group ends later. But for now, just try not to overlap them too much so that you can get the impression that the top one is layered a little bit in front of the bottom one. Next, I'm going to pick up some dark purple to get a higher concentration of purple with less water for lots of pigment. And I'm going to go in and very loosely around these flowers in the white space that's not the center of the flowers, add this dark purple color. Now, this is our shadow. Because lilacs are so bunched together, we need to give the illusion that there are potentially more lilacs underneath this grouping and that they're so close that they're creating so much depth and shadow that there isn't all of this airy white space between them. So I'm using the dark purple to create the shadow underneath these flowers. It's a technique that can also be referred to as negative painting. So I'm painting around the flower petals that I already have formed to give depth and dimension using just the lightest pressure of my brush to randomly place those purple spots. Now we're going to mix up some green. I am using sap green, and we are going to be doing these very large leaves. I'm pushing down with the full body of my brush to create the shape and the length of these leaves, but these leaves are so big and my brush is not quite as big to fully create it with the brush itself. So I do have to go back in and add a little bit more depth, especially where I want the vein line. So we always start with the tip of our brush with light pressure and push down with the full body of the brush, and then end with light pressure to create the tip. And then I'm just going back in on the other side and doing the same thing. If you curve both sides of your leaf the same way, it gives it a new type of shape, kind of almost like both ends of your leaf are puckered a little bit. But like I was saying, when you are painting something that is bigger than your brush is capable of painting, you might be able to get the general shape, but then you can just go back in and kind of fill in those spaces where it needs a little bit more help to reach the full potential of these large leaves. The idea for the lilac leaves is that they're really close to this main bunch and they're kind of fanning over the top. I'm using very light pressure and the tip of my brush to create the little stems coming down to the main lilac and attaching to the leaves. As everything is still wet and when I have a little bit of a darker pigment on my brush, I go back into the leaves that are starting to dry and I add a little bit more of the pigment so that we can get some more contrast and depth and detail in the leaves, because leaves, as we know, we've talked about so many times before, can look so flat with watercolor. So we need to figure out how to include highlights and midtones and dark tones so they look very rich and interesting. My brush is pretty dry and I'm picking up some more purple for a higher concentration of color, and I'm going in and just deepening the shadow colors that I already have placed. I might add a new shadow color here and there, but I just want to even give the shadows more depth with midtones and dark tones and to just make everything start to pop. I add a little bit more shadow along the line between the two bunches. I don't know if you can tell, but it really helps to separate the two of those, give them both a little bit more distinction between the two bunches. Now that the leaves have been placed, I am taking some of that light purple we used in the very beginning and I'm filling in some of the white spaces near the leaves and up around the leaves with some purple petals to give a really nice feeling of fullness and that the leaves really are overlapping on top of these lilacs. Make sure at this point to rinse your brush really well because purple and yellow cancel each other out, but we are going to mix up some bright yellow using my light yellow and my darker gamboge yellow to mix up a color for the center. We are just doing a quick, simple dot in all of the centers that we left open. And when I looked at reference pictures for lilacs, some centers seemed to be dark, maybe even a purple color, but I just thought the yellow was a better addition for watercolor. I just thought it was going to look really nice and punchy next to purple, especially because they are complementary colors. And with those details finished, our lilacs are done. So now we get to add it to the day 19 spot on our watercolor flower guide. I just love lilacs, everything about them, the color, the texture. There's so many fun things you can do with them, and man, they just make such a great addition to your repertoire to know how to paint. Thank you so much for being here today while we painted day 19, the lilac. I will see you all tomorrow for day 20.